consciousness that says, I'm just going to follow my heart no matter what. Then there is another goddess, and actually is three in one, but it's the goddess Persephone, and she's from Greek mythology. I'm saying three in one because in this story of Persephone, her mother Demeter, and there is another goddess which is the wise woman, elderly woman, Hecate. The three are really intertwined in this story. It's almost like each represent one aspect of one particular consciousness. But what happens to Persephone? And I feel this is a very relatable story and character because she's abducted into the underworld, presumably against her wishes. I'm saying presumably because if we go deep into the scholar research of this myth, you know, we can start to see how the myth began to be fixed in a particular tone, putting Persephone as this victim. And so I'm just gonna say there's more to that.
What if you were the living embodiment of all pervasive peace? What if all sentient beings all around you increase their vibration towards harmony by merely being in your contact? What if, through conscious reasoning, focused will, and intentional living, you reform yourself, thereby becoming a catalyst in sparking transformation in others? I'm Shilpa Lewis, meditation, mindset, and mindfulness coach for midlife mompreneurs, and you are listening to Omnipresent Awareness, the podcast that will inspire you to use your story to serve humanity in not just healing, but thriving as souls, each fulfilling their highest purpose. Namaste. Thanks for tuning in to Omnipresent Awareness. This is your host, Shilpa Lewis, and welcome back. Okay, so I'm running a little challenge as I'm trying to get more people to discover this podcast and the conversations that inspire those who value personal growth. And the best way to do that is to leave reviews. You can leave a review on Spotify, Google Podcast, or Apple Podcast. So here is a little request from me to you. If you feel like you have received any value at all from these episodes, then please write a little review and take a screenshot of your review. Once you've done that, email that screenshot to me at omnimindfulness@gmail.com. Once I get your screenshot, you will receive one of my infographics. Spark your meditation practice through Sankalpa. Sankalpa is the Sanskrit word for intention setting. Along with this, you'll receive a link to my guided meditation where you can daily practice intention setting with some inspirational music and breath work. This infographic, along with the guided meditation, is guaranteed to have you start your practice for meditation with a spark. It is my gift for you for being a listener, being a supporter, and of course for you to be able to manifest the best meditation practice. So thank you for showing up, listening, and being inspired, and most importantly, taking action. I appreciate you. So again, please don't forget to take a screenshot of your review and send it to omnimindfulness@gmail.com, and I will send you that infographic and the link to the guided meditation. We are now in the season of Seeds of Abundance, which is our third podcast season honoring spring, new mindsets, and abundance. This season will cover mindful money mindset, movement and healing, law of attraction, and embracing the feminine energy. Up next, Marialuisa Diaz de Leon Zuloga, founder of Mythic Life Project. Marialuisa is an international art therapist, somatic movement specialist, author, mythologist, educator, researcher, and performer. Marialuisa personifies feminine power. She is the creator of Mythic Life, embodying wisdom, beauty, and courage. Mythic Life is the fruit of over 20 years of practice, where she integrates somatic movement, dance, archetypal psychology, mythology, ecology, and expressive arts to create possibilities of awareness, healing, growth, and transformation. She wrote an unpublished collection of academic essays, Somaphilia, Remembering the Soul and the Aesthetics of Being, which she is preparing for publication. Born and raised in Guadalajara, Mexico, Marialuisa has lived in many places in Mexico and the US, which has taught her to navigate cultural differences and enriched view of the world. Her professional experience in psychology, somatics, and the arts spans over 20 years and includes work in education, private practice, and community intervention. Marialuisa received her MA in Engaged Humanities with emphasis in depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. She is a part of the core faculty for the Certificate in Movement based on expressive arts therapy at the Tamalpa Institute in California, where she supervises advanced students. In addition, she teaches graduate courses as adjunct faculty at Southwestern College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In our conversation, Marialuisa shares the powerful story of the formation of the feminine archetypal trinity, consisting of mythological figures Inanna, Persephone, Demeter, Hecate, and Psyche. As these feminine figures constellated, each bearing their unique gifts, this union became the catalyst for the initiation into the feminine consciousness. And now, here is Marialuisa. Well, thank you so much for joining. So Marialuisa, share with us a little bit about your background and how it connects to somatic arts.
Thank you, Shilpa, for having me here. I'm really, really happy, and I love to get to know people and talk about this. A little bit about my background in terms of professionally speaking. Yeah?
Both.
Both. And a little bit, yeah, I think the personal and the professional for me are somehow part of who I am as a whole person. And so, you know, I am right now registered as a somatic movement educator and therapist through ISMETA, and I'm also a registered expressive arts therapist through IATA. So somatic movement is something that I think I just, since I can remember being a girl, this whole idea of moving, being in my body, dancing. I love dancing all the time. It was just one of my favorite things to do. So that was something that I was doing without really knowing where I was heading in life on that. And about expressive arts, I just love the language of the arts also. Writing poetry, making up stories, improvising, and reading stories. So all those interests that as I was growing up, I developed became very important when I started to choose my career and my professional path. I'm from Mexico, and so I studied psychology there. And at the same time, I was involved with the dance troupe of my university. So the dance really opened up for me, and the dance training and being in performance and trying like new characters or stories really allowed me to tap into something that really made sense to me, like something in the imagination. And I felt like I belonged. And also the training in dance, not only, yeah, there are the benefits of being flexible or being strong and all of those uh, body skills, but more than anything, it was a discovery of look at what my body can do. Look what I'm able to feel. So at the end of my studies in psychology, I graduated and everything. I was like, how can I combine them? How can I put them together? And back then in Mexico, there weren't many options, really. Right now there are. So then that's when I came to the States, and I was stumbling into things, and one of these big stumblings happened with the Tamalpa Institute. And that's where the moment I learned about it, read everything on the website, I'm like, this is exactly what I want to do, because it's not about technique of any sort. It's not about being a good anything, dancer, painter, anything. It's about developing the sensitivity and just being able to dive into the exploration through the arts, movement, drawing, creative narrative, and poetry making. Yeah, that's a little bit about my background, how I.
And I just, for those who are listening, I came into your work or became familiar with you through the Somatic Summit. And I recall listening to you, you had described this journey that you knew you wanted to organically combine these things that innately spoke to you. And it was inside of you, that part of you was telling you, keep moving forward. You'll find things. There'll be challenges along the way, but there is something there. And I felt that that's so truly resonated, because much of our life often is that you just kind of know, that inner knowing. And the fact that you're so familiar with the dance, the arts, and also the stories, that is the compelling part.
Yeah, and you're touching on something that it's so vital for me and for my practice, and that's where I want my clients and my students to come in touch with, which is like this inner knowing. Like, there are all these challenges, as you said, because when I studied psychology, okay, everybody sort of knows what psychology does. Okay, and people will make comments like, are you psychoanalyzing me, and all of that, right? So, but then now I come and say, well, I'm a somatic movement therapist, and then people are drawing a complete blank, like, or I am an expressive arts therapist, and especially 15 years ago or even 20 years ago in Mexico especially, it was like, what? I mean, you're always doing stuff that nobody knows anything about. How are you expecting to make a living? How are you expecting to? And I'm like, I just know that this is my path. And I'm sorry, but I'm just gonna keep going forward. I'm just gonna stay with it. And I'm gonna work hard to just, continue going through this path personally, but also in offering this type of experiences to other people, because it really touches into what are we doing here in this lifetime, right? We all have a destiny, we all have a purpose, and oftentimes, at least in Western societies, we learn about being productive, success, which it's all fine, and yet a lot of people are feeling this emptiness, this void, like, I'm doing all these things, I followed all the steps, and now I have success, and now I have this. It's about having, right? Having all these different things, and yet what about the being? So is there a balance there, or isn't? Are you fulfilling your destiny with all what you have, or aren't you? Some people are late in life decide to change jobs, careers, countries, getting divorced, etc., because they realize that's not what I really want. So I feel like somehow, personally, I want to mention my grandparents, my maternal grandmother and my no, my paternal grandmother and my maternal grandfather, because I feel them in my life. They kind of, they come from very different backgrounds. Somehow I feel they've been guiding my soul. So that's important.
I truly can resonate. My particular career also had a very similar path. The field did not exist at the time, and it did not even have a label, but it evolved into now one of the, in the technology world, it's now known. However, it was a more of an intuitive feel and an understanding. And I often thought of myself as the apprentice. I would go where the lessons can be learned. But interestingly enough, I feel like the somatic arts and what you have described, even through the stories, feels so innately connected to really understanding humans, which is where I feel like your psychology probably also gave you some insights.
Absolutely. And one of the, as we enter into this conversation of understanding humans through the language of the body and the art, that's for me kind of the psychology I believe in. It's because psyche or soul, psyche is a Greek word that points to soul or spirit, and it's in the body. Where else, right? And actually, the whole idea that we are in the soul of something larger as well. But talking about our individual expression of our soul, it's in the body and it lives in to the level of each cell, each organ, and then the sensations we can get in touch with if we train ourselves to tune into the sensations of our body, sensations that have their right to be there, whether they're sensations that are pleasant or unpleasant, right? Because both, just as much as we don't want to feel the pain, sensation of pain, or being cold, or too hot, or hungry, or thirsty, or etc., we also don't quite grow up embracing pleasure either, right? So we have limited ourselves into what it's okay to sense and to feel and what isn't. So for me, the language of the body begins to kind of unearth these type of sensations, and along with those sensations, we can experience more of who we are individually.
And it's interesting, growing up, my background is Hinduism. Often I understood that we are more than this body, we are more than this mind. Yet in the Western world, particularly as women in corporate, everything became about the mind and living in the mind and being on a very horizontal level and not being grounded. Over time, I think I've shared with you that there was a time where the creative flow would come from within, and it stopped at some point. And I'm like, oh, I missed that embodiment that I felt. And part of what you're describing feels like the culture of healing by connecting inside and truly feeling things, even on a heart level. Is something missing? Just the simple act of putting your hand on your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so happy also that we are in this conversation together, because even though you were born in the States, you have a heritage of a different culture and different mythology, which is a lot of what my work is also grounded. And so for me also, recognizing my own mythological heritage that comes with my culture, and getting to learn from another culture how different it can be, and what can I feel resonance to. It's because it's something that speaks truly to me. I love in Hindu mythology and all these different faces that the deities have. You cannot pin them into oh, this is like a good one, or this is a bad one, or like they shape shift along the way, and they kind of are in their own process of uh, reconciling who they really are. And so that's a little bit similar to deities in the Mayan culture, in the Aztec culture, with their own flavor as well. And then we have the mythology, or I have the mythology coming from a Catholic background that traces back to Greek mythology, right? So, and I guess my path has led me to acknowledge how I come from a mythological heritage in which there is a worship to one particular deity. There is this one and then the rest. And in Hindu, there is this monotheistic aspect where there's a multiplicity of deities. And I've been able to embrace that more and more. And that transfer into an inner work in which I do for myself and I offer others, and has to do with let's embrace the different aspects of ourselves. Who we are does not depend on just one particular trait or one particular aspect or one particular story. If we identify ourselves too much with this one thing, we're missing out in the entire richness of who we are. So thank you for bringing this piece.
Absolutely. And I am drawn to the mythical aspect of your artwork, particularly like you were saying that in the Hindu culture, there are multiple deities, but they're multidimensional. They represent various aspects. And it's almost like the flow of nature. You know how one day I, as a woman, may be feeling great. The next day I'm a little more emotional. And you go through the waves, and those deities express things. Like you have someone who's the dance, the Natraj, who could at times, or she's Kali and can become someone with full of rage and anger. And you've mentioned three representations that come to your artwork. Could you remind me of what they are?
Yes, and you know, since I'm not an expert on Hindu mythology, I'm gonna tell you what I'm a little bit more invested and in these three different deities coming from. One is coming from Sumerian mythology. Sumeria is ancient Mesopotamia and current day Iraq, Iran and Kuwait. And there is a goddess Inanna. And she, for me, models a type of consciousness that knows what's in her heart and follows it through, even though it requires to undertake journeys into what is called the underworld and sacrifice something and coming out completely renewed. And you know, the idea of sacrificing something sometimes can be seen as from a very reductive religious background, but in fact, it's about making something sacred, and it's offering something that is no longer contributing to your path or serving you, you know, and you do it honoring it. You do it in a sacred way, but you say, no more of this. Sometimes these may be manifested in life in a way in which someone quits her job or leaves the marriage in spite of having all this money, having all this status, having all these beautiful children and all of that. But it just comes to a point where facing really yourself in the mirror of your soul, where this marriage, it's not really in alignment. So anyway, so that's one way, and coming from the Inanna consciousness that says, I'm just gonna follow my heart no matter what. Then there is another goddess, and actually is three in one, but it's the goddess Persephone, and she's from Greek mythology. I'm saying three in one because in this story of Persephone, her mother Demeter and there is another goddess, which is the wise woman, elderly woman, Hecate. The three are really intertwined in this story. It's almost like each represent one aspect of one particular consciousness. But what happens to Persephone? And I feel this is a very relatable story and character because she's abducted into the underworld, presumably against her wishes. I'm saying presumably because if we go deep into the scholar research of this myth, we can start to see how the myth began to be fixed in a particular tone, putting Persephone as this victim. And so I'm just gonna say there's more to that than, but this sense of being abducted in life, and that can happen through a loss that is unexpected, or an illness, which is a type of a loss, you're losing your health, or just going into an abusive relationship. So there are many things in which we may experience this abduction. I would say that collectively, in the entire world, experience an abduction when COVID hit, and for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, the abduction consisted quite literally of removing ourselves from all these social interactions. Businesses were closed, so now we just need to come out, and that just really created like a whole different way of being in life. And now we communicate through Zoom a little bit more open about it. But at the beginning it was like, oh my God, all the work needs to be done this way except essential workers and all of that. So that was like a collective abduction.
Yeah, interesting. I wonder if through that abduction story of that character, did she find herself then going inside for the healing?
Excellent, exactly. Beautiful question. That's exactly what happened. So the first stage of this abduction is like disorientation, because she's like in a whole different world. It's like, where am I? What happened? And I'm afraid. I'm scared. So that's something that we all can relate to, right? And then there is a kind of stepping into a phase of kind of acceptance mixed with, okay, I'm gonna use whatever wisdom and resources I know of and apply them here in this particular situation. In this case, Persephone remembered when she was in the underworld after being scared and all of that, like, wait a minute, my mother has always taught me about being in service of others. And then she opens her eyes and realizes that she was in the underworld, and who was inhabiting the underworld? All the dead. And the dead were disoriented. They also didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know where to go. And so she said, well, I'm going to be of service to them and help them getting oriented to this other world, and be there for them. And so with that, then the dead recognized that she was actually the queen of the underworld. So, she started to then be of service then and found her calling.
That is so profound, because as I mentioned to you, I want to learn more of the somatic arts, about how it can help heal. And that healing can come through the body awareness, body movement, art, and all those things. But when you share that somebody found their calling, I find that some of us don't find that till later, but some of us, like you, intuitively knew that your art would be something that will heal others.
Right. And I guess finding our calling is such a personal process. And that's also why I use this figures from mythology like Inanna and Persephone. And we have another figure that she's not a goddess, but she is a character in a tale, a Greek tale. It's the story of Eros and Psyche. And Psyche is the prototypical, the youngest daughter, the most beautiful, the most fair, and that everybody was like so taken by her beauty, but her beauty was in a way like a curse because nobody really dared to pursue her. And, you know, long story short, she had a very interesting type of abduction, but I'm not gonna go into that. She falls in love with Eros. Eros is Cupid, is the god of love, right? Romantic love. And for certain circumstances, she breaks a rule that they had made, and then he flees. And so now she's there, like, how am I get back my love, my Eros, right? And so the goddess Aphrodite says, well, you have 4 impossible tasks to take on. And so every task was excruciatingly difficult for her. And every task was a little bit of a riddle, you know, it's like you need to let go of a rational way to go about things, and you need to find like your intuition, basically. You need to come home to your deepest intuition, which is something that, again, we don't really grow up learning how to do, most of us at least. So, you know, in order to get back her love, Psyche was faced with these 4 impossible tasks. But I want to continue to cut the story short almost to the very end, because I want to make a point that the 4th task was the most difficult of all. And it had to do with going down to the underworld and retrieve something that it's called a beauty box that belonged to Persephone. And Psyche is supposed to retrieve that box, bring it up to the upper world, and give it to Aphrodite, because Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty, and you know, she just needed the beauty of the underworld to feel now fully beautiful. It's not as superficial as it seems, because beauty is a whole other topic that maybe we'll talk about in another conversation. But my point here is that these 3 characters in these 3 stories, Inanna, Persephone, and Psyche, in order to complete their transformation, their initiation, they had to make a descent. They had to go down into the unknown, into the scary places, into the parts that feel like I don't know where I am. And so this particular motif is present in the 3. And just to circle back, that for me, this descent in the somatic world has to do to come into the body. So that's like our consciousness, our attention, our awareness, which tends to live in the world of ideas, planning, projecting, remembering, regretting. He said, you said, I will be doing this, I should be doing that. How about you let that awareness come into the land of the body and to study the body? So that's kind of a big overarching metaphor for how the somatic work is actually a work of the underworld.
Wow, I had not made that connection, but it makes so much sense, particularly because of what you're just describing, that this current world we live in, there's so much outside and also projecting, living on this level. But by these 3 stories pulled in, what to me feels like healing.
Yeah.
Embodied healing.
How is that for you, healing? I'm curious.
The various aspects are having, like what you were mentioning, one is relying on your intuition. We forget to rely on our intuition, or we forget that we may have a bigger purpose in the depth of the darkness, going into the underworld and feeling like, what can I do? But then finding your voice. I think as a women, often we forget that we have a voice.
Yes, we do as women. Most women I know and I work with, there is this forgotten sense that we have a voice. And I'm going to take a little bit, a step further and say, you know, sometimes for a lot of people, as you said, putting their hands on their chest and going into feel your breath moving here, it's like extreme. It's like they've never done it. And wow, like it can evoke so many responses, right? Like some people may find it really like soothing and healing. For some people, it could be anxiety provoking. So that's why I think it's important to work with someone who is truly versed in the somatic work and help to guide and soften the awareness into being able to land fully into these places. And also if there's sensations, as I said, that are somewhat unpleasant or scary, to be able to metabolize what the sensation is doing, right?
Yeah.
But let that be one way of coming into the body to make this first kind of descent. As women, at least women that I've grown with, grew up with, and have met in my life, one of the deepest descents we can make in our body is to connect with our womb, with our ovaries. No matter if you are in perimenopause, in menopause, if you were surgically, if they remove those organs from you, there is an imprint, energetic imprint in that area of the body. Why is it important? Because the womb holds so much potential. The womb holds the consciousness and the wisdom about creating, and also the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, and how many of us know where our womb is? What's the shape? What does it feel like to feel the pulsing of the womb? Unless we're experiencing tremendous cramps, or when women are into labor, they experience their womb, right? But before that, it seems to be like
It's such a taboo.
Taboo or dormant place in our bodies.
Yeah.
And so it's for me the deepest form of descent we can engage in. And it's something that I often bring into some of my workshops, and I offer certain practices. And the interesting thing about those practices is for those like me, and maybe like you, in which this part of the body is taboo, doing the practice once, and expecting great results may not quite be that way, because we need to get reacquainted and begin to feel again, or for the first time, a part of our body that we've never felt. It's like when you go to the gym after many years of not going, you're gonna come back home and the next day you're gonna feel like, oh my God, I didn't know I had a muscle there. It's sore, it hurts. So it's kind of the same thing as well.
This really ties back to even this Hindu deities, the feminine energy, the deities and the idols, and they represented something like, if you were to anger those deities, there was rage. And was that rage considered like something scary? But still, there's energy there. And then what you and I have been talking about over email, at least, is that these deities, they represent this energy, the feminine energy.
Absolutely. And in particularly, rage is something that a lot of us just tend to not really even feel. It's like it's scary or it's something that has never been encouraged, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I truly believe that rage holds so much of, you say, it's life energy, and it's there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like all emotions are important and need to be welcomed into our experience. Just as when I work with people and we work with making drawings and creating images, and some, that on the first time, like, well, what I wanted to draw, it didn't quite come right. And I think this is an ugly part of my drawing, or this is scary, or is very disturbing. And then I said, well, let's hold the judgments and let's engage with the image, because whatever landed in this image, it's important to tend to, not to judge or criticize, or it's something that comes from you. So let's be curious and be compassionate in an inquiry where you can learn more about this image. So that's kind of the way we engage in image making and working with images. It's not like, oh, you drew a black something, that means that you have this. It's not the way I work. It's not interesting to me at all.
Do you feel that the this topic of feminine energy, that the artwork helps in somehow connecting to something that you may, as a woman, been disconnected to, not recognizing that energy or healing that energy?
Absolutely. In the expressive arts approach that I train in at the Tamalpa Institute, we typically, and I typically work with having a somatic and movement experience, bring it into a dance exploration, and then transfer it into a drawing, and then allowing some creative writing or poetry to come through. So by using, at the very least, 3 different art mediums, dance, drawing, and creative writing, each person will feel how this energy or this material gets shaped in different ways. When the dance is over, dance is such a beautiful art because it's in the moment, and then when dance is gone, it's gone, right?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, you can feel some resonances, but the drawing, it's a little bit more permanent. It stays there. I mean, you finish the drawing and you can still go back the next day and see it. So, and it carries some part of the dance. And then allowing the poetry to come forward, or the stories to come forward in a written form, allows to return back to language and the brain, verbal language and the brain, but from the creative aspect, as opposed to a logical, interpretative aspect or rational way to see things. So by keeping this creative practice alive, we are, just by doing that, that is engaging in the feminine, what I call the feminine energy and the feminine principle, because it's about creation.
I'm truly curious. Let's say, have you done these remotely? So if I were to say I'd like to go through the process from the dance and then the creative painting part to the writing, can you share how that could work?
Yeah, I do that all the time. I do that in individual session with people, and I do that in workshops or classes, right? So, there, if the workshop, usually they're an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes. So after a few minutes of, introduction and filling the group, because sometimes the series of classes happen, over the course of 4 weeks or 8 weeks. So then every time, like, there's a moment, kind of a check-in, and then I introduce a topic to explore. I use some somatic practices. It could be breath, it could be some particular movement and particular body parts or systems in the body, like that really depends on the topic. And that somatic practice allows at least 2 things. One, it allows people to drop into their bodies, to make that descent and feel whatever they're experiencing in their bodies. and gives people the resources to then improvise movement and dance. So I play some music and I guide people into, okay, now take this into exploring this in the dance. So each person will move in their very own ways. I can never choreograph that, never. And people getting, if I'm working one-on-one, I will be able to directly coach on the side or offer input into what I see as the dance unfolds. In a group process, I take it in Zoom, like I see what's going on and I make a general kind of invitation to do one thing or do another thing, kind of shaping the dance in different ways. And then we conclude that part, and then I offer them to go into creating a drawing from the resonances of the dance. So they will go and create a drawing, and usually in class is like 10 to 15 minutes maximum. But I always say this is very arbitrary, right? Because the creative process, you cannot put a time stamp and say, you're going to be done in 10 minutes. Sometimes people are done in 5, and sometimes people need 40 minutes. So I always say, we just get started in this drawing, but they're welcome to continue in their drawing after the class on their own, right? And then there is a moment of creating either a piece of poetry based on the drawing and based on the dance, or sometimes it's a story, and another 10 minutes go into that. And then we come back together, all together, and each person has a chance to share their image. Some people share their movement, some people share their stories. And then at the very end, a kind of a different harvest in terms of what about the material you work with today can you take and see the connection to an aspect of yourself in your day-to-day life, in a relationship in your day-to-day life, or in some project you have for your future life, or to heal something from your. So we make the connection at the end, right?
Yeah.
Not while we're doing the creative work, because the creative work, it's important to keep the container as such. We become artists for an hour and 15 minutes, and we work with the artistic sensitivity, not with the artistic skill that I said is not necessary, but is this the artist's sensitivity to approach the art.
Absolutely. It sounds like the unfolding is part of the journey, and making limitations of time often is a modern way of making us, I would say, stop the flow of creativity. But instead, you're just allowing the flow to occur, the dancing, really embodying and getting connected inside, which is something that we as women, I would say even men in our culture, in the modern world, are not really inside of and connected to. Particularly when you were mentioning the heart. During COVID, I would run group meditations, and one of the meditations I would have the heart-centered meditation, hand on heart. There would not be a dry eye. Women would be just in tears. Just the simple act of going breath and heart.
Yes. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And some people may feel scared of coming to one of my classes because they're like, well, I'm not a movement person. I'm like, you have a body, you're perfectly capable to come and join. Even people who cannot move due to injury or due to surgery or due to different things, I always work in ways to adapt things. So I always love meeting people where they're at. I'm not just there for you. Everybody does what I say, it's not about that. And one more thing I want to mention that I feel is super important. I've been working and studied these 3 myths, right, for a long time. I've done a lot of somatic work, also understanding the heart. I've done a lot of things, and yet I bring all my preparation, all my material, but I don't come to class just to impose that. I have that because that helps me and grounds me. And then someone will see something in the myth that that I never thought about. And that has happened to me. In a story, there is a, I usually start by telling a story at the beginning of the workshop series. And then when you're telling a story, there is some descriptive aspects of a story, about the landscape, about how people used to do that before you get into the actual story. Yeah. And for some people, something about the description of a landscape, it's it. And I'm like, yeah, so each person gets to work with whatever they're resonating with. It doesn't matter if it's not at the core of the story. When I present the myth of Persephone, people don't have to work with the abduction of Persephone. No, who am I to say you have to do that? I present the story, and then people start to see things that I didn't see before too, and that helps to kind of allow the myth to breathe, so to speak. And so, yeah, I don't work with formulas. I don't work with this means that, or you have to get there. I don't. It's much more interesting to me, as you said, this organic process to unfold and for me to stay curious. And also it's for me a way to enter into the unknown. Because even though I work with a myth from Greek mythology, in my Zoom classes, I have participants from South Africa, from Mexico, from China, from all over the world that don't necessarily have that particular connection. So it's something that I really love about the work I do.
I absolutely love the word flow keeps coming to mind, that I feel like by connecting these three stories together, what you've done is you've created a spark of creativity, because now people can see themselves not only in one story, perhaps all three, or connecting all three because they feel like it's one embodied movement.
Exactly. And sometimes we may feel like, oh, I feel like I'm very connected to this story for a particular moment in my life. And then the next thing you know is like, now I feel I'm more connected to the energy of this other story. And then the stories. So stories are there, in my experience, to help us kind of feel like we belong to something larger, that we can say, oh, or they're maps to situate our life situations. Oh, I'm kind of here, or I resonate with this energy. I feel like I have this rage, and I hear about Cali's use of rage and destruction, and how can I work with my own rage creatively instead of acting it out, right?
Absolutely.
Instead of literally going and kind of showing people's faces and all, or cutting people's heads. Like, no, how can I use this story and work with that creatively and really allow my rage a place to be honored as a sacred energy in my life?
And we are all energetic beings. And what often we forget is that the movement of all of the body, and by getting inside of it, allowing the flow to occur, and then channeling that energy. If it's rage, perhaps that energy now needs to be turned into something that's healing.
Yes.
One aspect also is interesting that comes to mind is that the feminine energy isn't necessarily about the feminine species. It's not necessarily about a woman. It could be a man who needs to tap into that aspect of themselves.
That's a great point, and I agree completely with you. I call it feminine from things that I've read, and I have adopted this term because it really speaks to me of a quality of life. It's not about a person, and it's not about gender. Feminine has to do with the relational aspect. Feminine has to do with the cyclic nature of life, right? And masculine is included in the feminine. But it's more of seeing that life is not just linear or causal, like causality, like this causes that, but it's actually an ongoing cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And that's at the core of feminine. So if someone doesn't want to call it feminine, maybe we can call it cyclic, right? But that's what it means to me. And all of us experience that in life.
We do. And some are more balanced than others. But
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, this has been an incredibly invigorating conversation for me because I just enjoy stories so much and enjoying how you've taken your artwork and created something so unique. And
Thank
so I
you.
can't wait to take one of your classes now.
I would love to have you there, and whoever else is called to join me in this adventure.
Do you have any insights for perhaps women who would like to explore more of the somatic arts?
Absolutely, it's to reach out and also to listen. You know, what is your calling in this moment in life? I'm not talking about the calling like a big calling in what I'm gonna do with my life. No, calling can happen in a day-to-day basis, in a smaller doses, right? So to continue feeling what is in your heart, what is in your womb, what's in your body, as opposed to what are your expectations or your plans. It's more about who you are and not so much about what do you have, right? It's about being.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so, and I guess the major invitation is to find whatever helps and supports you to find the courage to follow that calling. It will take you into a path that is yours and only yours to take. And there's going to be challenges, there are, and yet there are beautiful and precious treasures that you can find along the way, which are actually parts of you that you get to claim back and honor and own.
And what a wonderful time to live in terms of the somatic arts are now being recognized as something that is more mainstream.
Yeah, and professional. I serve in the board of directors for this organization, the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. And we are a home for the professional somatic movement education and therapy. So it is a profession, not just in the US, but all over the world. And it's growing, and it's a serious training that people do. And there are many approaches to the somatic work.
Thank you so much for sharing that passion. That is one thing that I definitely walked away with the Somatic Summit was everyone had a true desire to heal and there was passion.
Yes.
Well, thank
I
you
think
so
passion is important for
much.
everything we do.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Shilpa, for having me, for this conversation, for reaching out from the heart. And I'm blessed. Thank you so much.
And I feel blessed as well. And for anyone that's listening, please look in the description where we will have all of your links. Could you one more time share your main website link?
It's mythiclife.net. The net is important. mythiclife.net.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a lovely day.
You too.
Thanks again for tuning in. Check out the links in the description and please subscribe, follow, and share. And continue to be omnipresent.